Hello and welcome to part 4 in our 5-part series on healing, health, and wholeness, gospel style. This is a practical application of the principles demonstrated by Jesus in the Gospels. My name is Matthew E. Long, longtime Unity minister, and it's my pleasure to participate in this study with you. If you haven't already gotten the materials, the worksheet for today, you can go to peaceunity.net. And under the tab Library, you'll see Classes, and under Classes, you'll see Healing, Health, and Wholeness, and in there you'll see the worksheets, which gives you the references to the stories that we'll be talking about today, and it will be helpful to have read those stories, because I'm going to try to not spend too much time on the story and try to pull out the gems, if you will. And this is the fourth in this series. The first session was on Jesus' formula for healing. And we talked about the metaphysical basis for health, faith healing, if you will, and looked at the Trinity. You know, we understand the Trinity as spirit, mind, and body, and metaphysically, more popularly known as mind, body, spirit. And we looked at the Trinity as it relates to faith healing and the three aspects of faith that we talked about: belief, willingness, and thanksgiving. How belief focuses or directs our faith, our willingness empowers our faith, and thanksgiving, an attitude of gratitude, makes it real, brings it into reality. Then in the second session, we talked more about what we brought in the framework of the 4 functions of consciousness. In Unity Metaphysics, we talk about frameworks for understanding the absolute in relative terms, ways of understanding God. And the 4 functions of consciousness are intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensing. Intuition and sensing are inputs, and thinking and feeling are processing. And in the second session, we talked about spiritual healing, focusing in on intuition. Last week in the third session, we talked about mental healing, focusing in on the thinking aspects, our thoughts, divine ideas coming through the intuition. And today we're going to focus in on emotional healing, that our emotions are signposts for us as to how we are directing our faith, if you will. So if we're experiencing doubt, worry, anger, fear, some of those negative emotions, then that's a signpost that we're looking to the outer, that we're using our sense consciousness and not tuning into the intuition, into the divine ideas that can come to us through our minds. And so these are signposts, which says, okay, I'm going in the wrong direction. Let me look in the other direction to lift up my eyes. And again, we see where we were lifted up, where we looked up, if you will. And this is symbolic of looking towards the divine ideas that come to us through the God mind, through our minds, and put that feeling nature, and to get feelings of peace and tranquility and harmony and acceptance, of life and life's terms. So this brings us to our first story in today's discussion, which comes out of Matthew chapter 9, verse 27, the Gospel of Matthew. It's about a story about 2 blind men. And right off the bat, we got a duality consciousness, a belief in God and something else, the good and something else. And the truth is, there is only good, only God. In the beginning, God. What did God do? Created the heavens and the earth. What did God create the heavens and the earth out of? Well, there was only God. It's all God. It's all good. And we are made in the image and after the likeness of God. Then we are, and God is spirit, and we are inherently spiritual. So here, and the blind is of darkened consciousness, that we aren't able to see truth, that we're blinded to the truth. We're unable to see the truth. And in this story, they call the Son of David. Have mercy on us, Son of David. Mercy, of course, is a quality of love. Mercy, compassion, charity. These are aspects of that divine idea of love. And the son of David, David, of course, literally means beloved. David, from the Hebrew, David literally means beloved of God. It symbolizes that divine love within individual consciousness, within the it's also Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, calls David a type of Christ. So it's calling upon the Son of David, calling upon that love faculty within us, and to enter our house. And Jesus said to them, "Do you believe I'm able to do this?" And they say, "Yes." And he goes on to say that according to your faith, let it be done to you. He touched their eyes. So our eyes are the windows to the soul. They're our ability to see truth. And they were closed. And now they're being opened by the Spirit. Spiritual nature, the Christ within, is saying, be opened. So that's, to get past that emotional baggage that we have about how our life is supposed to be, how it's been, all the problems we've caused, to get past that and look to the Spirit of truth within, and using our emotions as signposts to direct us to remember to look up and to open our eyes to the truth. In the next story is also in Matthew, and it follows on the mute possessed, and it's a demonic. Of course, the demons are error states of consciousness. They're that part of our consciousness that believes in separation, that we are separate from our good, separate from God, and the truth is we can never be separate. But we can have those states of mind that separate us from us. And this one's mute, unable to speak words of truth. And it just says the demon was cast out. We don't know how or by what method. But when the demon was spoke out, and he spoke, and the crowds were amazed, never has anything been seen like this in Israel. And the Pharisees said, now the Pharisees, of course, symbolize the letter of the law consciousness, which is adverse to the Spirit. The Spirit is greater than the letter. And we need to be looking to the Spirit of the law, the Spirit of truth. And he claims that the demons cast out demons. Ooh, it's an interesting. We'll talk about that next time. Next week, much more detail. The next story is the daughter of a Canaanite woman. Now, we've got this doubling down on the female soul feeling nature in this story. The Canaanite, of course, Canaan literally means merchant, and represents one who is caught up in material things. So the Canaanites were separate from the Jews, the Israelis, if you will, Israelites, and were considered unclean. And so Jesus isn't going to have anything to do with her, because he's, Cain, as he says, that he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which harkens back to the story of the shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one was lost, and he left the 99 to get the one. And so Jesus is saying, well, I'm going to the lost sheep of Israel. And she says to him, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus says, well, great is your faith, let it be done to you as you wish. And the daughter was healed instantly. So once again, she's looking towards the soul is stopping, is saying, okay, this isn't working for me. All right, I'm tired of being hungry. I'm tired of being poor. I'm tired of being my daughter, my expression is being possessed by a demon. I've got to look up. I got to do it different. It's using that self-observation ability that we have, and that's the beginning point for healing. That's the beginning point for realizing truth in our lives. Is to realize that we're not. To realize that we are physical beings having an earthly experience, or spiritual beings having an earthly experience. And we're also earthly beings, human beings, attempting to express our spirituality. And so when we realize that we're expressing our humanness, it's time to stop and say, okay, I can do better. I can look up. I can raise up and see the truth. Now in Mark, there's a little different part of this story. He calls her a Gentile, which of course symbolizes worldly thoughts, unregenerated thoughts. The Jews, Hebrews represent spiritual thoughts, spiritual ideas, and the Gentiles are worldly thoughts, worldly ideas of Syro-Phoenician origin. The Phoenicians were ones who were battling the Israelites when they tried to come into the Holy Land, if you will, and they're considered resisting thoughts of spiritual ideas. But a Syro-Phoenician woman, Charles Fillmore in Metaphysical Bible Dictionary calls it intuitive perception of truth. And intuitive because it's a female who is seeing beyond the limiting thoughts of the Gentiles to come to the Hebrew, the Jewish man Jesus, the Jewish teacher Jesus, coming to those divine ideas. So it's intuitive perception of truth. And in Matthew it said, that the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. And in Mark it says that ate from the children's table. And it's interesting to think about Matthew being much more directed towards the Jerusalem community, and Mark being a little more inclusive, using the children versus the masters. The children are expression. The masters are the ones who are in charge, if you will. The next story we talk about has got to do with a deaf man with an impediment. It says that he returned from Tyre, that compressed state of mind, into by way of Sidon, which literally means to lie in wait, as if you're hunting. It's an expansive state of consciousness. And towards the Sea of Galilee. Now, a sea is a repository of ideas. We think of the sea. The symbol of water has many different meanings depending upon how it is used. Moving water generally has to do with cleansing. A pool or a sea is a repository of ideas, whether they're it's subconscious or superconscious ideas. And Galilee is that energy of life. And so we have the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee is symbolic for that superconscious ideas that can come to us through our intuition. And it was in the region of the Decapolis. The Decapolis literally means 10 cities, and cities are thought centers or soul centers. They're an aggregation of earthly thoughts, if you will. And they brought to him a deaf man. Deaf, you're unable to hear words of truth. Blind, you can't see truth. Mute, you're unable to speak the truth. And also had an impediment of speech. And then he begged him to lay his hands on him. It's interesting, he took him to the crowd, put his fingers into his ears and spat and touched his tongue. Here we have the water, movement of water, a cleansing happening, ears and tongue. And he looked up to heaven. Now, they added that little detail. Looked up to heaven, gave thanks, if you will, like in the feeding of the 5,000 and a couple other stories where he looks up. He raises his consciousness to that of heaven, to a greater reality, not to this limited expression, but to a greater expression. He sighed to it and said, "Be opened," and his ears were opened. The next story has to do with the blind man at Bethsaida. Now, we were at Bethsaida in John. It's Bethsaida, which literally means house of mercy. Again, that quality of love, which is mercy. We also have charity and compassion, are aspects of the love faculty. And we have another blind man, darkened consciousness once again. And Jesus led him out of the village. Again, the village is this congregation of ideas, or this gathering of thought center, if you will. And we're caught up in a circle of thought. I mentioned before about the do loop, the lower do loop, sensing, feeling, thinking, doing, sensing, thinking. Instead of opening ourselves up to that intuitive nature, that we're caught up in this soul sickness, if you will, in this particular village. He led him out of the village, and this time again he puts saliva on his eyes. This is a progressive healing, because the first time he does it, it doesn't take completely. It's better, but not. And so he does it again a second time, and he saw everything clearly. It's a progressive healing. In other words, once again, like in the story of the swine, the demons sent into the swine, and then the swine sent into the lake. That we have to keep on keeping on, to keep moving forward. To progress. Don't go back, all right? He's told in this story, don't even go back to that village. Don't go back to that error consciousness, that false way of thinking, that we have to move forward, to continue forward. The next story we come to is that of the epileptic boy. Epileptic, that's right? Boy in Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. And here we have the symbols of fire and water. Lord, have mercy on my son. Once again, calling for that feeling nature of love, of mercy, and talks about how he falls into the fire and often into the water. Now, fire is a cleansing symbol for our feeling nature. In the book of the Kings, Elijah's in the cave, and he's meditating, and first comes the earthquake, which is the physical nature. Then comes the fire, which is the feeling nature. Then comes the wind, which is the thinking, intellectual nature. And then the still small voice, the intuition. This symbology comes throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament, and very strong in the book of Revelation, which we have, with the 4 is very strong. And I talk about a lot in my series on Revelation, which I will post here before too much longer. So keep your eyes open for that. Fire and water are cleansing symbols. He brought them to the disciples, and Jesus talks about the faithless and perverse generation. The disciples were unable to cast it out. And he says, because you have too little faith. In Mark, it goes on and says that this can only be brought out through prayer. And in some ancient transcripts, it says prayer and fasting. And as we understand in unity, this is affirmations and denials. Affirmations are statements of truth that we hold on to, and we'll end the class with a statement of truth. And denials are release statements, releasing the power of error consciousness to control how we show up to life and to living. Now it brings us to our final story for today, which is that of the man born blind. This is in the Gospel according to John. And here was a man blind from birth. And the disciples ask a question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Here we got an idea of reincarnation, don't we? How could the man sin to cause him to be born blind unless he had sinned in a previous life? But Jesus says, neither this man or his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the God's works might be revealed in him. Which brings us to a true emotional healing. To not be concerned with whether it's my fault or your fault or his fault, to get out of that blame and shame game that we get involved in. But to realize that it's all about God's works being made manifest in us, to be revealed in us. And he goes on to say that I am the light of the world. Again, the blindness is being darkened consciousness, and the Christ within, that holy, perfect, sinless child of God, is coming to us to be the light of the world. And it harkens back to Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, which says, "You are the light of the world, and to let your light shine." Remember to let your light shine. Charles Fillmore, in his book Mysteries of John, talks about this and says that in this whole chapter, Christ is declaring, "I am the light of the world." When our blind, stumbling thoughts awaken to the reality of the Christ, darkness falls away and we see clearly. And about the works of God, he says that the works of God that we are to make manifest are the perfect ideas of a perfect man idea in divine mind. That's our job, is to strive towards perfect expression of that perfect idea. In my teaching, I often talked about, we talk about perfect practice makes, and most people will say perfect. And I always say practice will make better. Only perfect practice will make perfect, and none of us are perfect, so we might as well stop trying to be perfect, but to do the best we can, and to practice, to hold these ideas of truth, divine ideas of truth, when we find ourselves falling under the emotional nature, to deny the power of whatever condition that seems to be controlling us, and to affirm the truth that I am complete and healed and whole. Or affirmation, I am happy, healthy, whole, and free, just as God created me to be. I am happy, healthy, whole, and free, just as God created me to be. So it is, and so it shall be. God bless, and be well. Thank you. Peace.